The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 93.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Library. Today I want to start off a little bit differently because we've been putting plans together to make a few different changes. And mainly, I guess I just came back from Platform Conference put on by Michael Hyatt, and there were some great speakers there. Casey Graham and one of my my all-time favorite, Pat Flynn, was there, and had some time to speak with him and really gather some different ideas. And also had the opportunity and privilege of talking with John Dumas and Kate Erickson, and they gave me a few different ideas on how we can take this podcast to the next level. And so stay tuned, because at episode 100, there's going to be some big changes, not so much in the format. For those of you that love the fact that you can grab the summary of the book, that's still going to be there. However, some things are really going to up the ante for you, for the audience. Opportunities to win books on a daily basis and so much more. So stay tuned. I'll be coming out with more of that. And today we actually have Fergus O'Connell, author of Stuff I Wish I'd Known When I Started Working. Welcome, Fergus, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thank you, Wade. Thanks for asking me.
Before we get started, before we jump into your book, will you take a moment to introduce yourself? Tell us just a little bit about you personally.
I used to be a software person, so I graduated with a degree in mathematical physics, and then I went into software development, and I worked in that for about 10 or 12 years, first as a techie and then as a project manager. And finally, my last sort of real job before starting my own company was I set up a subsidiary of a US software company in Ireland, and I ran that for a couple of years. And then in 1992, I started my own project management consulting and training company. And that's one of the things I've been doing ever since, as well as sort of writing books in the area of project management and time management. And then I have this alternative life as a novelist as well.
Excellent.
So in a nutshell, that's me.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into what you mentioned there at the end, the book that you wrote, Stuff I Wish I'd Known When I Started Working, which will be made available for purchase December 3rd, 2014. And Fergus, we're going to move quickly, but really our focus is covering the top questions that our listener/reader wants to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Yeah, it's very simple, really. I was thinking one day about how I'd like to be 19 again. Like, I'm in my 50s now, and I was thinking how I'd like to be 19 again. But to have all the sort of knowledge and wisdom that I have now, picked up from, the people I've met, the things I've done, the stupid decisions I've made. And I was thinking of it in terms of life generally, but then I thought that a book which thought from the perspective purely of business might be a good thing to do. So in other words, things that, had I known them about business and about work, would have helped me a lot when I was 19 or 20 or 21 when I started. And so that was the idea. I ran it by my agent, and he thought it was a good idea. We pitched it to Wiley, and they thought it was a good idea. And I got to work, and here we are.
So Fergus, I'm coming back off the Platform Conference that Michael Hyatt puts on in Colorado, and he talked about how many books come out every single year, and there's millions of books that come out. And so this next question is really to help differentiate yours, and that's just, what makes your book different from others regarding the similar or same topic?
Yeah, we had a serious look to see were there other similar books, because I've said to my agent before, I've said, there's no book like this. And often his response is, that's because there's no market for this book. But we had a long look, and the publisher also had a look, and we couldn't find anything that was similar, really. I mean, obviously, there are lots of other self-help books. There are lots of books about starting your own business and things like that. But there was nothing that came at work from this particular angle of, I'm basically saying in the book, here are all the mistakes I made. There's no need for you to make those. You can learn what I learned by reading the book, and then you can go and make your own mistakes. And so we don't know. We can't identify another book that is in this little area that we've identified.
So how do you suggest the reader engage with your book? Is this one they can jump in and jump out as information is needed, or should they really start from beginning and read all the way through?
No, this is a jump in, jump out book. So the way it's ended up, we've identified what's turned out to be 24 chapters, 24 areas where I've just written the kind of stuff I learned. So basically, there are a couple of different types of chapters. Some of them are just where I try to sell people on a single idea. So, for example, the idea that you can aim high. Had you and I been born 100 years ago, we probably would have been very limited in what we could do. Like if my father was a coal miner, for example, or a farmer or a soldier, there was a good chance that that's what I would have become too. But these days, you can be whatever you want to be. You take somebody like Beyonce. I think her mother was a hairdresser or something like that. And, there's Beyonce doing what she's doing. So a couple of the chapters are about things like aiming high. A second chapter is about appreciating life. In other words, it's all right to have very ambitious dreams, but you've also got to live in the moment. There's no point in saying, when I achieve this, then I'll be happy. There's another chapter about why it's good to be creative, that we all need that. So there are things like this. There's another chapter on why it's good to fail. So there are about maybe 8 or 10 chapters that take a single idea and just try to sell the reader on this particular idea that, these things are good things to do. So those are some of the chapters. And then there are other chapters where they're much more, I guess, here's a whole bunch of knowledge that I can pass on to you. So, for example, there's a chapter about bosses. And, these are 4 things I learned about bosses. And I've learned them at some cost. So the first one is that bosses are actually human. Now, I know some people may argue with this and kind of say, well, my boss isn't human. But really, they are human. And if they're human, then they make mistakes. And I think often we kind of take the view that our boss is infallible, that whatever they ask us to do is the right thing. And that's one of the things I've learned, that, hey, I'm a boss, I make lots of mistakes. I often ask people to do dumb things. And I would like that they would point that out to me. A second thing about bosses is that bosses like to have their problems solved. So we all know the expression, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. I mean, I don't like that expression, but there is a certain truth in it, which is that if I'm a boss, I would like somebody to kind of say to me, well, look, I can't solve your problem in the way you want me to solve it, but I could solve it this way or that way. Would those work for you? And then I've also learned about bosses that they have a tendency to be delusional. So, bosses who start to talk about stretch goals or ambitious targets or aggressive schedules. I mean, I have no problem with any of those things. I'm a great guy to do ambitious goals myself, but I've often found that when bosses use phrases like this, they've kind of lost touch with reality, really. And one of the most obvious places I found bosses losing touch with reality is bosses who think that long hours are productive, because everything that I've seen tells me that long hours for sustained periods of time are just plain stupid. So there are some chapters like that where I have these sort of, I guess, hard-won lessons that I try to pass on. And then there are some chapters in the book which are very how-to chapters. So, for example, there's a chapter on common sense. About 10 or 15 years ago, I wrote a book which was called Simply Brilliant, and it was about common sense. It basically said that common sense is a skill that you can learn. And in that particular book, which I've summarized in this chapter of the present book, I've identified 7 things that, if you're doing them, you're probably exhibiting common sense. So, I don't know, Wade, do you want me to run through those? Would that be useful?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, take us a little bit deeper.
Yeah, okay. So, and so in some ways, what's nice about this book now, Stuff I Wish I'd Known, is that some of the chapters summarize whole books that I've written previously, and this is one of those chapters that does that. So here are the 7, I guess you might call them principles of common sense, even though principles is probably too grand a word for this. But you know that what they say about common sense, the trouble with it is that it's not all that common. So here are the 7 things. The first is that many things are simple. Now, some things obviously aren't simple, like what those guys did today of landing a space probe on a comet. That's clearly not simple. But many things that we do in work are simple. And often, if I find myself at a meeting where people are working up some incredibly complicated solution to something, my hunch then is that, A, we're barking up the wrong tree here, and that there probably is a much simpler solution to this. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, this saying of if you don't know what port you're sailing to, then any wind is a fair wind. So you got to know what you're trying to do, and you got to know it precisely. It can't be some kind of fluffy goal or objective. So we have this idea on our training courses of boxes and clouds, and that a goal has to be a box. It can't be a cloud, because then you have no way of achieving it or knowing if you've achieved it. Once you know the goal, the way goals are achieved, in fact, the way anything is achieved or the way you get anything done, is there's a sequence of events. And planning is about figuring out the sequence of events in advance. Firefighting is about making up the sequence of events as you go along. And when somebody does a post-mortem on a wrecked project or a failed project, what they're trying to do is understand the sequence of events after the fact. So we have this idea that, planning is a smart thing to do, because you try to figure out as much of the sequence of events in advance as you can. The fourth principle of common sense is that stuff doesn't get done if there aren't people to do them. And there are lots of delusional bosses out in the world who think that work can be done without people. That somehow if we work long enough hours that the work will get done. But as I kind of said already, working long hours for sustained periods of time is just unproductive. The fifth principle of common sense is that things rarely turn out as expected. So basically Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it will. The sixth thing is that things either are or they aren't, certainly where projects are concerned. So either a job is done or it's not done. And these ideas of 90% done and we're nearly there and we're almost finished, those don't really cut it when you're trying to commonsensically understand something or look at something. And then the final principle of common sense is basically, the so-called golden rule that we should look at things from other people's points of view, because if we did, we'd probably get a much clearer understanding of the particular thing rather than just seeing it through our own eyes all the time. So those are the 7 principles of common sense. And what I encourage people to do in the book is to maybe spend a week or a couple of weeks just applying these ideas and seeing the world through this prism, because they would almost certainly, discover some interesting things by doing that.
No, that's awesome, Fergus. And my next question is really to drill down and almost put the everything you just said in a nutshell. And that's, if the reader can only take away one principle or action item out of the entire book, everything that you just told us, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, there's a chapter about commitment and perseverance. And my favorite kind of quote from the book really is that commitment will get you started and perseverance will keep you going. So no matter what you're trying to do, I'm trying to become a best-selling novelist and screenwriter, for example. Now, I've had lots of books published, but so far none of them have hit the bestseller list. But commitment. I committed to this, 15, 20 years ago. And I just have been at it ever since, trying to up my game, trying to improve my writing, trying to write a better book each time. And, it seems to me that that's the secret of getting anything done. Yeah, sure, you need some talent, but there are people far more talented than me out in the world. But I reckon ultimately it's not talent that gets people there. It's commitment and it's perseverance. The commitment gets you started. It's the first step of the journey. And then the perseverance keeps you going, keeps you kind of rounding the next bend, taking the next step, pushing on to the next milestone. And that would be the one idea I'd want to take away. And if I could rewind the clock of my own life, that's probably where I would have liked to have started from, because I decided to be a novelist when I was 4, I think. And, I've taken lots of stupid detours since then, whereas really I just should have committed to it when I was 4 and started doing it, and maybe in my next life, that's what I will do.
So you might talk about this again in this next question, which is I'm going to ask you for your favorite quote, but I just pulled a fantastic quote out of what you just said. But do you have a favorite quote from your book?
Well, I guess that is my favorite quote. Commitment gets you started and perseverance keeps you going.
Okay, great. That's what I actually pulled out. So we got it set forward. So this last question, Fergus, is one that obviously as an author, I think that you'll have a appreciation for books and those that create a paradigm shift and have an impact on your life. So that's what we're asking you is, what is a book that you read that maybe one that you just couldn't put down, but created a paradigm shift that helped you move forward? And can you suggest that to our audience?
Sure. Do you mean a business book, Wade, or do you mean some kind of more general book?
In this specific question, any book.
Okay. I'll give you two. If I were to pick like a business book or a workbook or a career book, I would have to pick The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think that's just an amazing book, really, because again, it's common sense. Once you read it, you kind of say, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think in a work context, that would be the book I would choose. And then in terms of creativity and, as I said, my alternative life as a novelist, there's a book called On Becoming a Novelist by John Gardner. And it's just the most wonderful book about basically how to be creative and how to up your game and how to never stop searching for, a better result and a better book and more creativity. It's a wonderful, wonderful book.
So Fergus, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our audience to get more information on you and your book, Stuff I Wish I'd Known When I Started Working?
Yeah, well, I mean, the book, they can find it on Amazon. It'll be in Europe from a week from Friday, and it'll be in the States about 2 weeks after that. I have a personal website called fergusoconnell.com, where I talk about my writing, both my fiction writing and my nonfiction. And I also have a Facebook page, which is called Fergus O'Connell. And I'm also on LinkedIn as Fergus O'Connell. So there are lots of ways to track me down.
Excellent. Well, Fergus, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us.
A pleasure, Wade. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
And good luck on your quest to be a best-selling author. That's a fantastic goal, and hopefully we help you reach that.
Thank you. And maybe you'll interview me again when we do.
Absolutely.
All right. Great, Wade. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want more information on Fergus or his book, Stuff I Wish I'd Known When I Started Working, just check out our show notes page. Again, recently revamped and improved. And again, we would love to hear your feedback on how we can even take it to the next level. Thank you.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.